Ladies, are you feeling lost and alone in the midst of menopausal madness? Are you struggling with depression, anxiety, or just a sense of overwhelm? I want you to know that you're not alone in this journey. In this powerful podcast episode, we are coming together as powerful women to shed light on the mental health struggles that often go unmentioned. We are breaking the silence and giving a voice to the emotions that come with this transformative quest. Join me as we journey towards healing, growth, and the embracing the power of our own mental wellness. Yes, today's guest is going to share her secrets to physical and mental health and talks about her own struggles with depression after childbirth. But it is uplifting. My guest today is Jen Brown, someone who describes herself as a barre instructor, food enthusiast, women's advocate, mental health ambassador, girl boss, wife, and mother of 4. Impressed? Well, I can't wait to get on with the conversation. And we discuss everything today from fitness during menopause and breaking through body shaming that midlife women fall into, all as well as building and running a successful business. How does she do it? Let's find out.
My pleasure. It's lovely to be here.
It's one of these weird things because I follow you online and seem to look at you every day on Instagram looking gorgeous in your fitness kit that I feel like I know you because you share sort of certain aspects of your life. But this is actually the first time we've chatted properly. So it's really, really nice that we get to do this. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's great. I was just joking about my friends never actually call me because they see me online and they're like, oh, but I see you all the time. Yeah, it's a one-sided relationship.
It's like a sort of semi-fame then, I guess, isn't it? Because you put yourself out there so beautifully and so authentically.
Yeah, I think there are obviously boundaries in place, but I don't mind. I find Instagram a very double-edged sword. I don't mind sharing stuff because I think that it is genuinely helpful to know that other people are as well, maybe they're not as chaotic as my good self, but that everybody is juggling and dropping stuff all over the place. And I find the perfectionism that is presented online really difficult to stomach. And I think I'm trying to be a counterbalance to that because nobody needs to feel any worse about themselves than they already do, is my personal opinion.
But I think you're really good at doing that and giving the balance of sort of being inspirational and getting people motivated to do some fitness, whilst also giving a bit of reality and saying, I'm having a bit of a rubbish day today and this has happened, etc. But what we normally start the podcast with is a look at your morning routine. Do you have anything that you do to set yourself up for the day?
Well, I mean, it's funny you should say that. I have got 4 kids and we need to have all 4 children out of the house by 7:35. So my morning routine is, I know, it's slick, but there are certain things that I do have in place. So I always go to bed with a glass of water next to me, and I drink that when I wake up, so I'm hydrated before I get up. I open my curtains to let the light in first thing. I take a 30-second stretch, which doesn't sound like much, but actually vastly improves my mood. I get up in my exercise kit, so I have a rule for myself that I don't shower until I've exercised, which I think is a really helpful one for people trying to get into the exercise habit. It's one thing to get up in your lycra, but it's quite another thing if you haven't actually washed. That's quite that's quite a good motivation to get you inside the gym, and then I'm off. So I stretch, I open up the curtains, and I drink my water. And it takes and I always make my bed actually. I always make my bed because it takes 30 seconds and it makes me feel like I've achieved, even if everything else goes bottoms up.
It's quite interesting because while it's a really quick routine, you cover a lot of bases there because you've hydrated, you've stretched, which is really interesting, and you've started off your circadian rhythm properly by opening your curtains and getting the light in. So actually, you're ticking quite a lot of boxes just in that very simple routine.
I think probably efficiency is the name of the game.
Yeah, I'm getting that. But I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. It's hard getting kids out the door in the morning. So tell me about barre, because that's your profession, isn't it? You're a barre instructor. And some people listening might not quite know what that means. So if you could chat us through that and give us a brief introduction, that'd be helpful.
Of course, bar. I mean, I feel obviously it's my world, so I feel like it's gaining in recognition all the time. But I think unless you live in a major city, access to an actual bar class can be tricky. Um, so bar is a fusion exercise between ballet. I need to make it very clear that never had a ballet lesson in my life. So ballet and Pilates is a really strong focus on form in bar. Ballet Pilates are more traditional strength training exercises. So you've got your squats, your lunges, all of that stuff mixed in. But I think what differentiates bar from everything else is that it is low impact but high intensity. So the low impact thing is really important because it is much kinder on your joints at the age that we find ourselves. But it's high intensity, so you are still getting in your cardiovascular fitness, you're getting in a lot of strength training, and you're also getting, it's not my motivation, but you get the results that lots of women are keen to look for.
I've done a few of your classes online.
Oh, did you enjoy them?
Yeah, I did, but I was actually quite surprised at how tough they were as well. That you definitely feel like you've had a really good workout afterwards, but you also choose great tunes, so the time does pass quite quickly. And I think some people might think you need equipment, particularly for bar, but you really don't. You talk a lot about just use your ironing board. It's the best use for an ironing board you've ever come across, and all that kind of stuff. So it's just something of the right height that you need, isn't it?
Yeah, you need something that's stable in hip height, and most importantly, I think the thing that people appreciate the most is that nobody is watching you. If you do it at home and the first time you come to the bar, it is a little bit like learning how to, like a baby giraffe learning how to walk. You move your body in such a different way that I think it's very easy to feel very self-conscious. And certainly when I did my training, I did it with everybody else was 20 and a ballerina. Um, and I felt very, very self-conscious. And the joy of being able to do it at home is that you get over that awkwardness without feeling everybody's looking at me.
Yeah, which I think is great. And it also means you can fit it into your day because you only need that half hour or 45 minutes. You don't need to travel to the gym or anything to do it. It's just that set period of time at home. And tell me why bar is so good for midlife women.
Well, I think I touched on the main reason really earlier on is that it's low impact. So as we age and we lose our estrogen as our kind of um, menopause approaches, 10 to 12 years before that, your estrogen levels are already starting to drop. So your likelihood of your joints starting to ache and so on and so forth is becoming higher. So bar is low impact. We try not to put much strain through the joints, and I always offer if there is any jumping in the class, I always try and offer a low impact alternative. But it is really important, I think, that women realize they need to keep on moving, even if they're aching. The most important thing you can do is to keep moving, but you need to move in a way that is good for your body. So bar is sustaining, it's nourishing, it's something that I really hope I'm still going to be doing in 20 or 30 years' time. Um, so bar's great for that. It's also brilliant because as much as I would love to say I have a really great mindfulness practice in place, I really don't. It's never I've never found the thing that vibes for me. And but that thing for me is bar because there's a kind of alchemy that takes place between the music and the concentration that it takes to focus on what we're doing in bar that all other thoughts are put to one side. So I find you're very present during bar. So I find that it has become my mindfulness practice. It has become my mental health space. And I would say over 80% of my feedback that I get from people mentions that mental health aspect of bar, that it's really improved their relationship with their body, their anxiety, all those things that we struggle with in our 40s and 50s. They're like, oh, I never expected it to make a difference to that, but it's made a huge difference. So I think that's a really wonderful side effect of bar that is perhaps not recognized enough, and certainly has become absolutely integral to my mental health.
That's really interesting that people notice that as well, that you get so much feedback on that, because often it's a side, people see it as a side effect. They don't actually really, they don't sort of acknowledge that it's happening. They see the strength in their body, they see the body changing, they see it maybe helping their core. And then I think it's quite another step then to notice that it's helping your mental health. So it must really be quite a noticeable difference then for people to mention it to you.
And it's almost instantaneous. I think, you're used to your kind of endorphin high after you take exercise, perhaps, but what you don't get is this mindfulness space where everything just dissipates away. And what bar lets me do is get outside of that constant chatter, like, have you done this? And, and it's just like, oh, phew, okay, here, space for me that no one else can touch.
That's perfect. And you set up, well, I don't know when you set up Meet You at the Bar, but certainly I came across you in the pandemic, and that was when everything seemed to really blossom for your business, is my understanding. Is that right?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I will never forget that day as long as I live. I got pregnant with my fourth child somewhat accidentally. I was trying not to get pregnant, and my husband was just so determined to have a fourth child. And I said, right, if we're going to do this, I have got to continue working because I found staying at home, it was the most challenging thing I've ever done. It was a really pivotal moment in my mental health, understanding myself when I realized that staying at home was actually detrimental for me, and I was a far better mother and human being working some. And but I think the guilt that I felt around that was huge, because I was brought up by a stay-at-home mum who had four kids and, ran this perfect home and had incredible food and was, always there for us. And I really wanted to give that to my children, but I realized that I really couldn't actually pull that one off. So I built a gym in the garden, getting back to the point. And the idea was that I would run maybe a class a day during school term time, and it would be pocket money, and I would just wait until the children were all at school and then work out what it was going to look like after that. And then the pandemic hit, and obviously I had to shut the gym. And I asked, because the girls who used to come to my gym used to pay for a term up front. So I said, look, I've got all your money. Um, Let me refund you. And they all said, no, you can't do that. And so I said, right, well, I'm going to give the money to charity in that case. But what I will do is put on classes online for you whilst we're doing the pandemic, thinking that the pandemic would last, what was it, like a month to start. And then I just came downstairs one morning and my phone had about 95 missed calls. And I was just like, what? And the Mail Online had done their first best home workouts to do. And they had put me number one on their list. And at the time, I think I had 300 Instagram followers, if that. No tech, no nothing. And I went to do my class that day, and I had, I don't know, I mean, a couple of thousand people watching me rather than the normal 9 or 10. And then we were off. We were really off at a full flat out sprint. I did 4 free classes a week during the pandemic, and then I moved online. And we've really never ever looked back. It was quite something, um, trying to pull that off with four kids. So two of my kids weren't at school by the time in the first pandemic, in the first lockdown. So I had a baby, a toddler, and the two older ones, and the business, and my husband was at home working. But I do two homeschooling, but I do, and I think this is so important. I have got a live-in au pair who got locked in with us in the pandemic. So I think this is something that's really, I really want to talk about today because I think a lot of people, I get a lot of questions on my Instagram and stuff, like, how do you do it? I don't. I get in all the help that I possibly can. And I think that anybody who thinks you can do it all, or you look at people who look like they're doing it all, they're not. It is simply not possible. So I wish there was more open and honest about what it really takes to make it work. Because although my business is really successful, I also pay a lot of people in order to make that happen. And I think there is a discussion that needs to be had about motherhood and running businesses and motherhood guilt and all the things that go around it. Um, you need to work out what your time is worth, both financially and emotionally. And so there are things that I won't compromise on over my kids, and therefore I have to pay someone else to do the other stuff.
Do you know, I think this is why you're so successful online, because you are true and honest. There's a propensity, if somebody who looks like you, it sort of look like you have this perfect life. And I think you're very keen to say, yeah, I have a great life, but this is how I make my life work. And I think that's really helpful for people. And I think even the fact that you want to sort of put across today, I have an au pair, I have lots of help, it doesn't just all happen, does it? You need a team behind you to enable you to run a successful business. You need a team if you've got 4 kids.
I think also the other thing that I've maybe found out about being on Instagram is that the beauty aspect is also really not real. And also, the idea that I'm inspirational is, whilst obviously it's kind of nice to hear, I shout, I scream, I cry, I feel incredible frustration. I think everybody has the same emotional range. And, you know, I mean, if we really want to go into it, we can go into the privilege aspect, right? That I felt confident enough to pull this off during a pandemic. But I also have got 2 degrees, a private school education. I've always been told that I can do it, and therefore I believe I can do it. And I think that's, when people go, how can you pull, how did you do that in your 40s with 4 children and so on and so forth? Well, y- because I could. I had all the right bits in place, and I'm not trying to talk myself down because I'm actually incredibly proud and delighted with what I've done. But I also realize that it's not me that's made it happen. I am a factor in it, but there are lots and lots of other things.
I think what you're also real about on, and you've touched on this previously, is I know you've put a couple of times on Instagram, I'm actually not going to be up for a few days. I'm just dealing with things at home. I'm going to be quiet, or I'm going to do stuff. And you talked briefly about your mental health. Was it affected by having your children? Is it hormonal?
This is another conversation that I think is really, really important to have publicly, about women and their mental health and their hormones, because the older I get and the more into this phase of life I get and the more I'm learning, the more I'm horrified by how little I used to know. So I've had recurrent bouts of depression. So my first was when I hit puberty, and then I had another. I think I had one in my early 20s, but perhaps I was going out a bit too much, partying a little bit too hard, not taking care of myself very well. And then after I had my first child at the 6 week mark, I genuinely fell off the cliff. Um, and it was bad enough for me to be hospitalized and have a care team put around me. And my first husband would say it cost us our marriage. Um, and then when I got pregnant with my second child, I obviously had this health team around me. And I was medicated through my pregnancy, and I saw fit to think I'm fine, and I took myself off my meds. And not really, I think, because I didn't want my baby to be breastfeeding, and I don't I'm not entirely clear of my motivations, but what I know is I wasn't educated enough to be told don't do it, because all the antidepressants do is mask your depression. They don't actually fix it. And so straight away I fell off a cliff again, and the whole process started up again. Then I got divorced. And when I met my second husband, he wanted to have more children, and I was really very, very wary. And of course, round 3 and round 4 promptly followed. And I have altered my whole life to fit around my mental health. I now exercise for a living. I eat really, really well. I no longer party like a rock star, although I think I quite want to. But I've really, really curtailed. I barely drink. I, make sure I spend time in fresh air every day. Every part of my life has changed to become about keeping me balanced. And I've always thought, I think, that it's been my fault somehow, in the sense that I've always felt I'm too impulsive, but what I've realized at the age of 45 is that actually I've got incredibly good self-control, to have changed my whole life. And yet I hit my menopause pretty early, and um, my mental health fell off the cliff again. And so I've started poking around, and I'm progesterone intolerant, which explains the kind of really bad dips after my babies. And the evidence that is coming through only just now is people, women who have suffered with their hormones. I mean, it's of no great surprise, right? With postnatal depression or anxiety, are hit at menopause, surprise, surprise, really badly. Now, there still isn't enough research in there, but the education that goes around that needs to take place, because, you know, I do this for a living. I know a lot about menopause as part of my job, and it still absolutely floored me. And, you know, we're not talking like, oh, I felt a little bit sad. It was terrifying. It was very frightening for my family, you know, you, and it is a discussion that still doesn't take place. And it is through no fault of my own. And it's really taken me all this time to realize that these this illness is something that I can't control. I can mitigate it. I can definitely set myself up to succeed. But can I stop it happening? No, I can't. That is my hormonal balance or imbalance, whichever way you want to look at it. And it's something that I need to live with and have learnt to live with. But for people who aren't in my position and don't have that education and that um, access to resources, it must be the most alienating, frightening thing that I can think of, really.
We're seeing this a lot. As you know, I also run a company, Salora, which is a supplement business for perimenopause, and we're seeing this a lot anecdotally as well with our clients and our customers. If you've had quite a hormonal roller coaster, then when you hit perimenopause and menopause, and particularly with depression or depression low moods around about the hormonal fluctuations, it hits even harder at menopause as well. And it's interesting that it's not talked about a lot yet. I think there's a lot of people talking about different symptoms, but not necessarily depression around menopause. And I think that's still something that we need to talk about much more. So really, thank you for sharing with that today. And I know that it's something you live with, and Instagram is tough, isn't it? Because you look like you're managing, and then I think every so often I've realized, because I can imagine what you're going through when you come offline, that something is going on. So it's really, really special that you shared that with us today. Thank you so much. I think the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was it doesn't just affect the individual. And you touched on that briefly. It was scary for your family. It affects the whole family. It affects your friendship groups. It affects the way you work as well.
There isn't an aspect of your life it doesn't touch, right? Because it becomes you, it absorbs you into it. And I think that until, I mean, I now take antidepressants alongside my HRT. I know lots of women say they go to the doctor and the doctor, first thing the doctor does is offer them antidepressants. But I got to a point where, despite the HRT, despite doing everything that I do for my job, I really wasn't coping. And again, for the fifth time, I think in my life, they have saved my life. Um, and people, oh, I don't know. I mean, the field of mental health is so complex, and like menopause, everybody's experience is so entirely individual that any kind of blanket ban. But there's something around the stigma of it that just needs to be broken because it's outside of our control. And you can't be blamed or be thought less of for things that are literally nothing to do with you, you know?
But I think it takes to get to our stage in life to actually realize that as well. Like you said, there's a, I know when I've gone through periods of my life, it's definitely things happen with my children and you blame yourself for what's going on and actually realize these things are completely out with your control. And that's quite a hard step to take, I think, to say it's not my fault. This is what's happening around me.
Well, I agree. And I think there's that certain expectation of women of a certain age to put up and shut up and just get on with it. I struggle with that idea. Actually, just because we've had our children and our kind of role is fulfilled, so to speak. The end point I'm trying to get to is that asylums used to be full of women of a certain age, and that idea that if you've had your children, your fertility is done with, well, then you can just sail off into the distance, and if you go mad, let's just remove the problem. It's terribly outdated, and I think as we live longer, and I look at, did you see the picture? There's a picture of the Golden Girls against the Sex and the City girls.
And they're about our age now.
Life has changed so much for women in the last 30 or 40 years, but there are still taboos that need to be broken down. And the only way we can break them down is for people to just talk about them honestly and openly and without shame and without embarrassment and without anger as well. Actually, I think without anger is an important thing to bring to the table. If it's just factual, then you can't really argue with that.
Well, thank you, Jen. Um, I also wanted to talk to you about some of your tips that you would give women. So, if you had perhaps 3 top tips for women in midlife to deal with everything, I think you've maybe touched on some of them, but what would you share with other women?
In general, I mean, I think the first one, and I'm not just saying this because it is my business, but exercise does become a non-negotiable in midlife. You need it for everything. You need it for anxiety, depression, your bones, your metabolism, your self-esteem, your endorphins, your balance, your flexibility. I mean, there isn't an area of your life that it doesn't cover. So movement does become our medicine in midlife. And if you're not moving yet, please go for a walk today, because that is movement. We can build on that. So that would be my first non-negotiable. I think the second thing is to embrace the changes, as hard as it is, but our thoughts inform how we feel. So I think if we're telling ourselves, I don't know, that we're ugly or that we're useless or that our bodies are just past it, or these thoughts actually are going to become how we feel. So you know I try and be thankful, and I know some people may go, oh, well, that's fine, you're thin and whatever, but my body doesn't look like it used to look. Of course it doesn't. I've had 4 kids, but I try and be really grateful for everything that it can still do, because I know there's going to be a point that I look back on it and think, oh my God, it still moved. It didn't, I mean, it does creak, but it did all the things that I wanted it to do. And I was worried about what it looked like. What on earth was I thinking? So embracing the changes and kind of getting on board with it, because having good thoughts is going to make us feel better. Having bad thoughts is not going to help anything. And I think probably the third thing that I would advise is to start looking at your future self really hard. Start looking at your future self and your life to what you want your life to look like. Like my dad is 84, 85, and mentally, cognitively, he is all there, but his body is, oh, I mean, it's awful. I feel so sorry for him, and it is impacting his ability to enjoy his life in every aspect of it. And that has really sharpened my focus. I want to live. It's not about how long I want to live, it's about how well I can live my life for. And I just encourage women to really start thinking about that and start taking actions now to put it into place for 20, 30, 40 years' time, because we live a third of our life post menopause. Let's live it well rather than just exist.
Well, it might even be half our lives post menopause. That's the scary thing now if we live longer. But I love that about future proofing. I think it's so important. I think there's a lot we can do at this stage in our lives as well, even if we haven't been particularly fit and healthy in our 20s and 30s. That can change. You don't need to see yourself as I'm not an exercise person. You can go out every day, you can take a walk, you can start walking a little bit quicker after a couple of weeks, and you can just build up from there. And even I read, I think this week, that um something like, if you can get, I think the magic number is 9,000 steps in, but even if you could get 3,000 steps in, it decreased your risk of dementia. So it was all about just building up.
Absolutely. And I think, that's the key to building good habits, is to start small. And once they're in place, well, just add in a bit more and then add in a little bit more on top of that. So it's not overwhelming. It's achievable, it's realistic. And it's amazing what you might find that you start to enjoy. Now, it might take you 6 months to start to enjoy it, but at some point you will start to feel the benefits. And it doesn't just have to be about exercise. I mean, it can't actually, let's be honest, it can't just be about exercise. You've got to start taking action on your food, on your sleep, all of on your mental, what do you surround yourself with? What do you look at? What do you consume? All of those kinds of things in order to live a long and happy life. What's your sense of purpose? They're big questions, but with more and more time on our hands, these things become more and more important, and how do you help your community? All of those kinds of things that give us a real fulfillment in life need to be looked at.
Jen, I've absolutely loved our conversation today, and it was not really where I thought it was going to go, but I think that's probably what makes it even more special. So I really appreciate all the things you've shared. I think it's going to help a lot of different women, and I think the fact that you're so open about these things is just wonderful. So thank you so much. And I'm going to keep following you on Instagram and keep being inspired by you, even though you hate that word. Um, Thank you for today.
It's my absolute pleasure. I loved it. Thank you so much for having me on.